In the basement of Washington's Masonic Temple is a shrine that is closed to the public. It's a memorial to one of America's most powerful men, J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI and a close friend of President Lyndon Johnson.
But I didn't want this opportunity to go by without telling you again how proud I am of you and how glad I am that Uncle Sam's got you working for us. And if you just think that you're going to get off the payroll because you're getting a little older, you're crazy as hell. I don't retire the FBI.
This is the story of how Hoover tried in secret to prevent equal rights for blacks, legislation Johnson wanted more than any other law.
Looks like it's about time to stop talking. I just think that we're going to have them out in the streets again if we don't make some little progress.
The man Johnson needed as an ally was Martin Luther King, the very man Hoover wanted to destroy. Hoover's plot took place in a twilight world away from the cameras, so we have used actors to illustrate many of the scenes in this film. But what was recorded at the time were telephone calls between President Johnson and key players in the drama. These are the calls you will hear in the film. The roots of this story go back to August 1963, 3 months before Lyndon Johnson succeeded the dead President Kennedy. 200,000 people gathered in Washington for the biggest demonstration for civil rights in their country's history. After a summer of direct nonviolent action in America's Deep South, black leaders decided to lift their campaign to a national level with a march on Washington. It was this event that raised a 34-year-old black preacher from Georgia to the leadership of the civil rights movement.
I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
It became one of the seminal speeches of the century, but it also divided the country at large, the Congress and even the government.
When we allow freedom ring, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
That was a wonderfully moving and eloquent speech. It had an enormously positive effect in the country at large, but also in the White House with the President Kennedy, with the Attorney General. They thought it was a magnificent speech.
Where King's speech did not go down well was in J. Edgar Hoover's office a mile down Pennsylvania Avenue. This was the FBI's analysis, drafted for Hoover that night.
Negroes constitute the greatest single racial target of the Communist Party USA. I believe in the light of King's powerful demagogic speech that he stands head and shoulders above all Negro leaders put together when it comes to influencing great masses of Negroes. We must mark him now as the most dangerous Negro in this country.
3 months later, John Kennedy was dead and Lyndon Johnson was president. The succession pleased Hoover. The Kennedys had disliked him, and he saw Johnson as a Southerner with an ambiguous record on civil rights, as well as a personal friend. One of Johnson's first telephone calls from the Oval Office was to Hoover.
You're more than the head of the Federal Bureau as far as I'm concerned. You're my brother and personal friend, and you have been for 25, 30 years. I got more confidence in your judgment than anybody in town.
I certainly appreciate your comment.
So.
Thank you.
What Hoover could not have known was that as president, Johnson would make the enactment of a new and radical civil rights bill his overriding priority. Introduced by John Kennedy, the bill had been struck in the Congress for months. On his third day in the White House, Johnson telephoned Martin Luther King, who'd spoken well of the new president in public.
A good many people told me that they heard about your statement, I guess, on TV, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right.
I've been locked up in this office, and I haven't seen it, but I won't tell you how grateful I am and how worthy I'm going to try to be of all your hopes.
Well, thank you very much. I'm so happy to hear that, and I knew that you had just that great spirit, and you know you have our support and backing,
well,
because we know what a difficult period this is. But I think one of the great tributes that we can pay in memory of President Kennedy is to try to enact some of the great progressive policies that he sought to initiate.
Well, I'm going to support them all, and you can count on that, and I'm going to do my best to get other men to do likewise, and I'll have to have y'all's help. I never needed more than I do now.
Well, you know you have it, and just feel free to call on us for anything.
Thank you so much, Martin.
All right, thank you.
As a political operator, Johnson was used to dealing with allies and opponents right across the political spectrum. Martin Luther King, as leader of all those vivid and persuasive demonstrations in the South, had helped create the climate in which Middle America would accept a radical civil rights bill. It was now up to Johnson to use his legendary political skills to overcome opposition in the Congress, among Republicans and in the powerful bloc of conservative Southerners in his own Democratic Party.
The President of the United States.
Johnson telephoned his principal ally on Capitol Hill, the Liberal Senator Hubert Humphrey.
Now, do you think you got this civil rights in decent shape?
Yes, sir. Mr. President, we've got a much better bill than anybody even dreamed possible. We haven't weakened this bill one damn bit. My God, we're going so far in this bill that it'll be the greatest advance in 100 years.
Of course it will, of course it will. Well, now, what you've got to do is tell these leadership people is this one thing, the thing that we are more afraid of than anything else, is we'll have real revolution in this country when this bill goes into effect. And unless we have the Republicans joining us, we'll have mutiny in this goddamn country.
That's right.
Well, you're doing a wonderful job, though. And I think stay on this one, though.
Yes, sir.
All right.
All right.
To force the Civil Rights Bill through the Senate, where opposition was strongest, Johnson had to build a cross-party coalition of moderates. He had to be willing to break with some of his closest personal friends in politics, especially the leader of the Deep South Democrats, Senator Richard Russell of Georgia.
Senator Russell and the president sat knee to knee on the second floor of the White House. And I remember Lyndon Johnson saying, he says, "Dick, I love you, and I owe you. But I got to tell you, Dick, don't get in my way on this civil rights bill. Because if you do, I'm going to run you down." And Dick Russell, in that soft, rolling Southern tone, says, "Well, Mr. President, you very well may be right. But if you are, you will lose the South forever." And then I remember the President saying to him in another soft voice, leaning toward Russell, he says, "Dick, if that's the price I've got to pay, then I'll gladly pay it."
Johnson's other intimate friend, Edgar Hoover, also stood for the opposite of what Johnson was trying to achieve. Hoover was a white supremacist at the head of a white FBI. To him, black civil rights leaders were left-wing agitators, probably in the pay of the Kremlin.